History, as you know, it is wrong, and the proof is in the objects left behind. Some discoveries are so baffling, they are called out-of-place artifacts, relics that defy our established timelines. By the end of this journey, you will have a new framework for questioning everything you were taught about the past. How did a complex mechanical computer exist 2,000 years ago? And why was a modern-looking spark plug found sealed in stone 500,000 years old? What does it mean when we find stories we cannot yet read carved in stone or written in an unbreakable code? Are you ready to see history not as a fixed story, but as a mystery still being solved? That diver pulled from the sea a mystery wrapped in green corrosion, a single artifact that would rewrite our understanding of ancient ingenuity. For decades, the Antikythera Mechanism was a puzzle no one could fully solve, a corroded lump of metal and wood that seemed impossibly out of time. It wasn't until the late 20th century, with advanced imaging techniques like X-ray tomography, that researchers could finally see inside without destroying it. What they found was breathtaking, delicate, precisely cut bronze gears, some with teeth so fine they rivaled the work of an 18th-century Swiss watchmaker, were arranged in a complex system of interlocking cycles. This was not a simple calendar, it was a sophisticated astronomical calculator, a device that could predict the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It could even forecast lunar and solar eclipses, modeling the irregular motions of celestial bodies with a mechanical precision that historians believed was impossible before the Renaissance. The genius of its design lies in its use of differential gearing, a technique thought to have been invented in the 16th century for modern automobiles. Yet here it was in a device crafted around 200 years before the Common Era. This forces a profound question. If the knowledge to build such an instrument existed in ancient Greece, what happened to it? Why did this spark of advanced mechanical engineering flicker and vanish, leaving no trace in the historical record for over 1,000 years? The silence that follows the Antikythera Mechanism is deafening, suggesting that our timeline of technological progress is not a steady upward climb, but a story with chapters missing, perhaps even entire libraries of knowledge lost to the depths of time. This silence of lost knowledge is not confined to the sea. Sometimes the evidence sits quietly in a museum basement, waiting for a new perspective. In the National Museum of Iraq rests a simple clay jar, roughly 2,000 years old. It is unassuming, just 13 centimeters tall, but inside lies a provocative assembly. The jar contains a copper cylinder, sealed at the bottom with asphalt, and within that cylinder sits an iron rod. When an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine is poured into the jar, this simple combination becomes something extraordinary, a basic galvanic cell capable of producing a small electric current. Discovered in 1936 near the outskirts of modern Baghdad, the artifact was initially catalogued as a storage vessel for sacred scrolls. It was a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig who later looked at the assembly with fresh eyes. He noticed the asphalt seal, which would have held the iron rod in place and insulated it from the copper cylinder, and he proposed a radical idea. This was not a jar for holding papyrus. It was a battery. Recreations of the so-called Baghdad Battery have consistently shown it can generate just over 1 volt of electricity. To us, that seems minuscule, barely enough to power a tiny watch. But in the ancient world, that small, steady current could have had a very specific and valuable use: electroplating. Imagine a skilled artisan wanting to coat a silver object with a fine, durable layer of gold. Using a battery like this, they could suspend the silver object in a gold salt solution, connect it to the jar, and through a process of electrolysis, deposit a thin, even layer of precious metal onto the surface. The result would be an object that looked and felt like solid gold, but used far less of the expensive material. This is not mere speculation. Experiments have proven the jar is fully capable of this exact task. So we are left with a compelling question. Did the Parthian or later Sasanian cultures possess a working, albeit rudimentary, understanding of electrochemical principles? If these jars were indeed batteries, what other applications might they have explored, perhaps for ceremonial purposes or in early medical practices that we have yet to understand? Mainstream archaeology often offers a more conservative explanation, suggesting the jars were simply used for storing sacred scrolls, with the iron and copper components having a purely ritualistic or structural role. Yet the functional design is difficult to ignore. The asphalt sealant is a perfect insulator. The choice of two different metals, iron and copper, in an acidic electrolyte is the fundamental recipe for generating electricity. The coincidence seems staggering. Whether used for plating, for tingling sensations in religious rites, or for another purpose entirely lost to time, the Baghdad Battery challenges a linear view of innovation. It whispers that the spark of discovery can ignite in any era, and that our ancestors might have harnessed forces we consider modern in ways we are only beginning to glimpse. This theme of unexpected sophistication extends far beyond the Middle East, appearing in artifacts buried for millennia under the dense soils of another continent. The idea of ancient electricity is a quiet hum in the background of history, but some artifacts arrive with the force of a thunderclap. In the spring of 1961, three friends searching for interesting minerals in California's Coso Mountains found a curious lump. It looked like a plain, rounded geode, the kind that might hide beautiful crystals inside. Hoping for a sparkling interior, they took a diamond saw and carefully cut it open. What they found was not quartz or amethyst, but something utterly bewildering. Inside the hardened shell was a perfectly circular section of a mechanical device. At its center was a bright metal shaft surrounded by a ceramic collar, all encased in a hexagonal housing made of what seemed like porcelain. To anyone familiar with engines, the resemblance was immediate and shocking. It looked exactly like a spark plug from an early 20th century automobile. They called it the Coso Artifact, and it ignited a controversy that still smolders today. The object itself was strange, but its context was impossible. The material encasing it was not a typical geode crystal cavity, but a tough concretion of hardened clay, pebbles, and what appeared to be fossilized seashells. This kind of concretion forms slowly, layer by mineral layer, around an object over immense periods. Initial geological examinations suggested the casing could be 500,000 years old. That number places the object deep in the Pleistocene epoch, a time when early humans were just beginning to use simple stone tools. The notion of a spark plug from that era is, by every standard account of human history, an absolute impossibility. Mainstream science offers a more down-to-earth explanation. Skeptics propose the object is precisely what it looks like, a champion spark plug from the 1920s, perhaps lost by a miner or prospector. They argue that mineral-rich water in the soil can, under the right conditions, form a hard limestone concretion around a man-made object in a matter of decades, not millennia. The apparent age, they say, is an illusion created by rapid mineralization. Yet, for those who first studied it, the details did not align perfectly with a known spark plug model. The configuration of the internal components, as revealed by X-rays, showed subtle differences. The hexagonal housing was also unusual. This leaves us with a tantalizing, unresolved puzzle. If it is just a modern spark plug, its rapid encasement is a fascinating geological oddity in its own right. But if the original geological assessments hold any weight, we are staring at a profound anomaly. Could it be evidence of a forgotten technological culture, one that rose and fell in a distant prehistoric age, leaving only this single, cryptic piece of machinery behind? Or does it represent an even stranger possibility, an anachronism so severe it suggests a flaw in our very understanding of time or the nature of discovery itself? The Coso artifact forces a simple, unsettling question. When we find a clearly human-made object in an impossibly old place, which do we doubt first, the identity of the object or the age of the place? This dilemma does not end with buried machinery. It echoes in objects that were never meant to be buried at all, but displayed for all to see, carved in stone with a message we have yet to fully decipher. That question of a human object in an impossibly old place finds its most iconic symbol not in a spark plug, but in a simple tool. In 1936, near the town of London, Texas, a couple walking along a creek bed made a discovery that would become a cornerstone of the out-of-place artifact mystery. They found a curious rock, a smooth, rounded nodule of limestone. When they cracked it open, they were stunned to see a solid iron hammerhead embedded within, its wooden handle extending into the stone and itself transformed, partially turned to coal. This was the London hammer. The geological context was the true shock. The limestone nodule that encased it was identified as belonging to the Cretaceous period, an era that ended around 66 million years ago, the age of dinosaurs. According to standard geological timelines, this would mean the hammer was sealed inside rock over 100 million years before modern humans are supposed to have evolved. The hammer itself adds layers to the puzzle. Analysis of the iron head revealed an unusual purity, with almost no slag bubbles or impurities, a quality of smelting that suggests a more advanced metallurgical process than one would expect from a pioneer-era tool. Even more telling is the state of the wooden handle. It wasn't just preserved, it was petrified, its organic material replaced by minerals in a process that typically requires immense time and specific conditions. The conventional scientific explanation is one of rapid concretion. In this view, the hammer is a relatively recent tool, perhaps from the 1800s, that was lost or discarded. Over time, mineral-rich water percolated around it, depositing layers of calcite and other dissolved minerals that hardened into a limestone shell. This process, while often slow, can under the right circumstances create a convincing stone casing in centuries or even decades, not millions of years. The petrification of the wood could be explained by the same mineral-laden waters. Yet, for many observers, this explanation feels incomplete. The hammer is completely encased, with no visible gap or seam showing where it might have fallen into a pre-existing cavity. The stone appears to have formed around the tool as a single, solid unit. This creates a persistent and visually powerful anomaly. If the geological dating is correct, even in a broad sense, the implications are staggering. It would suggest that a being with the intelligence to forge iron and craft a functional tool existed alongside, or even before, the most famous creatures of the deep past. Proponents of alternative historical theories see it as physical evidence for a lost cycle of civilization, an advanced society that was wiped clean by some cataclysm, leaving only these perplexing fragments behind. The debate ultimately circles a single point of tension. Do we trust the apparent age of the rock or the apparent modernity of the object inside? The London hammer stands as a perfect, frustrating metaphor for the entire field, a literal fusion of the impossible that challenges us to question which timeline we believe, the one written in the stone or the one written in our history books. This search for clues of deep human history does not stop with tools in stone. It compels us to look for evidence of movement, for traces of those who might have traveled the ancient world long before we thought possible. The journey for evidence of early travelers often hinges on a single, misplaced object. In the soft earth of a Native American settlement along the coast of Maine, archaeologists in 1957 uncovered something that did not belong. It was a small, worn silver coin, found amidst stone tools and pottery fragments from a Penobscot village dating between 1180 and 1235. At first glance, it was just a curious bit of metal, but when experts cleaned and examined it, they recognized the stylized cross and crude lettering. This was no colonial Spanish real. It was a Norse penny, a hacksilver coin minted in Norway between 1065 and 1080 during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre. The Maine Penny, as it became known, is a whisper of a story written in silver, one that places a Viking artifact over 3,000 miles from the nearest known Norse settlement in Newfoundland and centuries before the voyages of Columbus. This solitary coin creates a profound historical puzzle. How did a piece of Norse currency end up in a prehistoric Native American site along the New England coast? The most accepted theory is one of long-distance trade. We know the Norse had a foothold in North America at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, a settlement dated to around the year 1000. It is plausible that from this base, explorers ventured south, trading with indigenous peoples. A Norse coin, perhaps carried as raw silver to be cut for trade rather than used as money, could have passed from hand to hand through extensive native trade networks that span the continent. Over generations, it traveled south, eventually finding its resting place in Maine. This explanation is elegant and fits within the known archaeological framework, but it leaves a haunting question of scale. Why only one coin? If trade was established enough for a Norse artifact to travel so far inland, where is the other evidence, the tools, the definitive signs of sustained contact? For those who challenge the standard narrative, the Maine Penny is a tantalizing clue that Norse exploration may have been more extensive than our history books allow. It suggests that the Viking presence in the New World was not a single, failed settlement, but a series of sporadic, wide-ranging voyages along the eastern seaboard. The coin is a physical anchor for the Norse sagas that speak of a land called Vinland, a place of wild grapes and timber. Could the Penobscot River Valley have been part of that legendary landscape? The coin's context is crucial. It was not found on a beach where it could have washed ashore, but deliberately buried within the layers of a domestic site, suggesting it was valued, kept, and lost by someone who lived there. This transforms it from a stray curiosity into a piece of social history, an object that crossed cultural worlds. Mainstream archaeology rightly urges caution. A single artifact is weak evidence on which to rebuild history. It could be a hoax, though most scholars dismiss this due to the circumstances of its professional excavation. It could be a much later loss, a coin from a 19th century collector's cabinet that somehow worked its way into the archaeological layers, though this is considered unlikely. The prevailing view holds it as a genuine, fascinating anomaly that proves the possibility of contact but not the permanence of it, yet its power lies precisely in its loneliness. It is a solitary data point that illuminates the vast darkness of our ignorance about pre-Columbian crossings. It forces us to admit that the ocean was not an absolute barrier, but a highway that could have been traveled by more than one culture in more than one era. If a Norse coin could turn up in Maine, what other objects from other distant shores might be waiting to be recognized? This line of thinking inevitably turns our gaze southward, to a continent where other artifacts suggest a knowledge of the world that seems impossibly broad. The idea of ancient travel stretches the map of history, but what if it also challenges our understanding of ancient science? Tucked away in a museum case in Cairo is an object that seems to defy its own time in a different way, not by where it was found, but by what it appears to represent. Discovered in 1898 in a tomb at Saqqara, this small wooden artifact is officially catalogued as a model of a bird, crafted around 200 years before the Common Era. At first glance, that is exactly what it looks like, a stylized falcon perhaps, but a closer inspection reveals perplexing details. The most striking feature is its tail. It stands perfectly vertical, a flat, straight rudder that no bird in nature possesses. Its wings, rather than being rounded or feather-textured, are smooth and distinctly angled, with a cross-section that experts note resembles an airfoil, the carefully shaped wing of an aircraft designed to generate lift. It looks less like a creature of the air and more like a machine built to fly. For decades, it was displayed simply as a curious toy or a ritual object. Then, in the 1970s, an Egyptian doctor and aerodynamics enthusiast named Khalil Messiha took a fresh look. Struck by the design, he proposed a radical reinterpretation. This was not a bird, it was a scale model of a monoplane glider. To test his theory, he and others built precise replicas. When launched with a little thrust, these models did something remarkable. They did not simply tumble or fall, they flew. The Saqqara Bird, as it became known, demonstrated stable gliding capabilities, traveling considerable distances in a smooth, steady path. Its vertical tail acted exactly as a rudder would, providing directional stability, while the angled wings generated lift. It was, by all functional measures, a working model of a fixed-wing aircraft. Mainstream Egyptology offers a more grounded explanation. Scholars suggest it is indeed a bird, perhaps a stylized representation of a falcon, a sacred animal associated with the god Horus. The vertical tail could be a symbolic feather or a simple artistic convention. It might have been a child's toy, a wind vane, or a ceremonial object with a meaning we no longer grasp. The fact that it can glide, they argue, is a happy accident of its streamlined shape, not proof of intentional aerodynamic design. After all, many flat, weighted objects can be made to glide if thrown correctly. Yet, the specificity of the design gives pause. The ancient Egyptians were master observers of nature. Their art is filled with exquisitely detailed and recognizable depictions of birds in flight, perched, and hunting. Why would a craftsman in this tradition, for a single object, abandon all anatomical accuracy to create a form that aligns so neatly with principles of flight that humanity would not formally rediscover for another 2,000 years? This leads to a speculative yet fascinating line of inquiry. Could the Saqqara Bird be a model of something else entirely, a representation of a craft known only to a select few, perhaps within the priestly or scholarly class? Ancient texts from various cultures speak of flying vehicles and celestial chariots, often dismissed as myth or metaphor. But what if they were attempts to describe real, if rudimentary, technological achievements, the knowledge of which was lost or kept secret? The artifact does not prove the ancient Egyptians had aircraft, but it does forcefully ask whether they, or another culture they learned from, understood the basic physics that would make flight possible. It represents a seed of an idea, a physical question mark that urges us to wonder how much about the past we have explained away as superstition, when it might have been proto-science waiting to be recognized. This notion of encoded knowledge becomes even more compelling when we find it not in a suggestive shape, but written in stone, in a language that refuses to be read. That question of encoded knowledge finds its most dramatic expression not in a small wooden model, but on a vast sheet of parchment, a map that seems to hold secrets of a world that should not have been known. In the year 1513, in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, an admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis compiled a world map of breathtaking scope and puzzling detail. Using source charts he claimed came from Columbus himself, along with ancient maps from the Library of Alexandria and other Portuguese and Arabic sources, he created a document that was both a masterpiece of its time and a riddle for ours. The surviving fragment, focused on the Atlantic Ocean, shows the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the recently discovered lands of South America with remarkable accuracy. But it is the southern edge of this map that ignites a firestorm of controversy. Below South America, the parchment depicts a long, rugged landmass. To many who study it, the contours of that coastline bear an uncanny, some say precise, resemblance to the northern shores of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered by European explorers for another 300 years. The impossibility deepens with a single, staggering detail. On the Piri Reis Map, this southern land is shown not as a frozen wasteland, but with mountains, rivers, and bays, a landscape free of ice. According to modern geology, the Antarctic ice cap formed tens of millions of years ago. The continent's landmass was last seen in an ice-free state roughly 34 million years in the past. So how could a 16th century Ottoman admiral, drawing from sources that were themselves centuries old, possibly depict a coastline that has been buried under thousands of feet of glacial ice for epochs beyond human memory? For historians like Charles Hapgood, who studied the map in the mid-20th century, the answer was both simple and revolutionary. Piri Reis was not inventing this geography. He was copying it from far older source maps, charts created by an advanced seafaring civilization that existed in a remote pre-glacial age, a culture with the knowledge and technology to survey the entire planet. In this view, the map is a palimpsest, a later copy that preserves the ghost image of an ancient world, a world before the ice. Mainstream cartography and history offer a series of more conventional explanations. Scholars point out that the map is a compilation, a patchwork of many sailors' reports, sketches, and legends. The southern landmass could be a speculative addition, a reflection of the ancient Greek idea of a great southern continent, Terra Australis, believed to balance the northern landmasses. The apparent accuracy of certain features, like the bulge of Brazil or the placement of islands, could be attributed to skilled guesswork, the synthesis of many partial accounts, or simple coincidence. They argue that forcing a modern map of Antarctica onto the parchment's vague outlines creates a match only by ignoring the map's many obvious inaccuracies and stylistic conventions. Yet the specific details give one pause. The map notes on the parchment, written by Piri Reis himself, state that the coastlines were drawn from ancient source maps that showed the entire world. The depiction of the Andes Mountains inland from the South American coast is another feature not fully explored at the time. The debate, therefore, hinges on a question of interpretation. Are we seeing a lucky guess and artistic license, or are we looking at a faded echo of profound, lost knowledge? The Piri Reis Map challenges more than just the timeline of exploration. It challenges the very continuity of human achievement. It suggests that the age of discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries may not have been the first, but rather a rediscovery, a stumbling upon fragments of a much older global survey. This concept transforms the map from a historical curiosity into a potential piece of evidence for a cyclical view of history, where civilizations rise to technological heights, fall into ruin, and leave only the faintest, most enigmatic traces for those who come after. It asks us to consider whether our planet's true cartographic history is written not in the ink of known explorers, but in the lost charts of forgotten ones, whose voyages are recorded only in myth and in the perplexing accuracy of a single, surviving skin of parchment. Maps hint at lost explorers, but some artifacts suggest visitors from much farther away. Among the most enduring and controversial tales in alternative history is that of the Dropa Stones. The story begins in 1938, when a Chinese archaeologist named Kai Pu-te is said to have led an expedition into the remote Bayan Ha Mountains. There, in a system of caves, his team made a bizarre discovery. They reportedly found neat rows of graves containing skeletons of small, large-headed beings, and nearby hundreds of stone discs, each about a foot across with a perfect hole in the center. These were no ordinary stones. Each disc was carved with a fine, continuous spiral groove that, upon closer inspection, was found to be composed of a series of tiny, unfamiliar hieroglyphic characters. The narrative takes an even more extraordinary turn. According to the legend, a professor in Beijing later managed to translate the inscriptions. The glyphs allegedly told the story of the Dropa people, beings who crashed their spacecraft in the mountains 12,000 years ago and, unable to repair it, were stranded on Earth. The stones were said to be their recorded history. If true, this would be the most profound out-of-place artifact imaginable, directly challenging not just historical timelines but the fundamental story of human origins itself, blending archaeology with ancient astronaut theory in one explosive claim. Yet here is where the story fractures. No physical evidence has ever been produced for modern, independent scientific examination. The original discs, if they ever existed, have vanished. No reputable museum holds them. No peer-reviewed journal has ever published a study on their composition or inscriptions, and the principal figures in the story are obscure. Mainstream archaeology universally dismisses the Dropa Stones as an elaborate hoax, a modern fabrication that gained traction through sensationalist books and magazines in the mid-20th century. Scholars point out that the Bayan Ha region has a well-documented archaeological record, and no evidence of such a find exists in official Chinese archaeological reports from the era. The entire account is built on a foundation of hearsay and unverifiable anecdotes. So why does the legend persist so powerfully in popular culture? The answer lies in the deep human longing it taps into. The story provides a tangible, physical object for the age-old question of whether we are alone in the universe, and whether our own past might be intertwined with that of other star-faring cultures. It transforms the vast, impersonal cosmos into a place of possible ancient contact. The Dropa Stones narrative serves as a crucial cautionary tale within the study of historical mysteries. It highlights how easily a compelling story, devoid of verifiable evidence, can capture the global imagination and take on a life of its own. It reminds us to temper wonder with rigorous scrutiny, to demand more than just a good story. This lesson in evidentiary standards turns our attention away from unverified legends and back to the physical world, to stones that are undeniably real, equally strange, and waiting in plain sight to tell their own, more grounded but no less baffling story. The line between an elaborate hoax and a suppressed history can be razor-thin, and nowhere is that line more vividly drawn than on the surface of a stone. In the dry riverbeds near the town of Ica, Peru, a local physician named Javier Cabrera Darquia began receiving strange gifts in the 1960s. Farmers would bring him smooth, gray andesite stones, each one meticulously engraved with scenes that defied all logic. The images were not simple patterns or familiar animals. They showed human figures in dynamic interaction with creatures unmistakably drawn as dinosaurs, some being ridden like beasts of burden, others hunted with spears. Other stones depicted what could only be described as advanced medical procedures, including detailed illustrations of what looked like heart transplants, cesarean sections, and the use of telescopes to observe celestial bodies. Over time, Cabrera amassed a collection numbering in the thousands, a vast library in stone that presented a complete, alternate vision of prehistory. The stones themselves are physically compelling. Andesite is a hard, dense volcanic rock, difficult to carve even with modern steel tools. The engraved lines are deep and smooth, covered in a dark, natural patina that suggests significant age, a weathering that appears to match the stone's surface. To the untrained eye, they look ancient. This patina is the first point of fierce debate. Skeptics, including nearly all mainstream archaeologists, argue it can be artificially created in a short time using simple materials like shoe polish and cow dung, a technique local artisans were known to use. They point to confessions from some of the farmers who supplied the stones, admitting they carved them to sell to tourists eager for a piece of the mysterious past. The sheer volume of stones, critics say, is not proof of antiquity but proof of a thriving cottage industry. Yet, for those who believe the stones hold a genuine mystery, the confessions are not the end of the story. Proponents argue that a few modern forgeries do not invalidate an entire collection, especially one with such consistent and complex iconography. The medical scenes are particularly puzzling. The heart transplant images show a sequence, with figures using what appear to be surgical tools, displaying an understanding of anatomy and procedure that seems far beyond what should have been known in any pre-Columbian culture. The dinosaur depictions are not vague monsters, but show specific genera like Triceratops and Stegosaurus, creatures only reconstructed by modern paleontology in the last 2 centuries. How could uneducated 20th century farmers possess such detailed knowledge of paleontology and advanced surgery to create thousands of coherent, technically accurate forgeries? The answer, believers suggest, is that they didn't. They were merely rediscovering and copying a much older tradition. The Ica Stones present a direct and brazen challenge to the foundational narratives of both biology and human history. They propose a world where humans and dinosaurs coexisted, and where a sophisticated civilization with medical knowledge rivaling our own flourished before being wiped away, perhaps by the same global cataclysm that ended the age of reptiles. This is not just an out-of-place artifact, it is an entire counter-narrative etched in rock. The debate they spark goes beyond authenticity. It forces us to ask how we evaluate evidence that lies outside the accepted paradigm. When faced with an anomaly of this scale, do we dismiss it because it doesn't fit, or do we allow it to question the fit itself? The stones stand as a monumental Rorschach test for how we view the past, a past that may be far stranger and far more incomplete than any textbook can comfortably contain. A massive stone slab pulled from the roots of a Minnesota aspen tree tells a story no textbook could hold. In the autumn of 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing his land near the village of Kensington when he and his son uprooted a large tree. Tangled in its roots was a flat, 200-pound rectangle of greywacke stone, its face covered in strange, angular markings. Oman, recognizing the characters as similar to the runes from his homeland, had stumbled upon what would become one of America's most fiercely debated artifacts. The Kensington Runestone, as it is known, carries a message carved in stone, a narrative that, if true, shatters the traditional timeline of European exploration. The runes tell of a party of 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an expedition from Vinland to the west. The inscription, dated to the year 1362, describes a tragic outcome. It states that 10 men were left by the sea to look after their ships while the main group camped a day's journey inland. Upon returning, they found their comrades dead, slain with blood. The stone concludes with a plea for mercy and a record of their presence. This single paragraph, etched over 700 years ago according to its own text, claims that Norse explorers were not only in North America, but were traveling deep into the mid-continent, over 2,000 miles from their known settlement in Newfoundland, a century and a quarter before Columbus sailed. The academic world erupted in conflict over the stone. From the moment it was presented, prominent linguists and historians denounced it as an obvious hoax, the work of a clever 19th-century forger, perhaps even Oman himself. They pointed to apparent anachronisms in the runic alphabet used and grammatical forms that seemed inconsistent with 14th-century Old Norse. The very idea of a Norse expedition to Minnesota in the 1300s, with no supporting archaeological evidence of settlements or trade goods in the region, seemed fantastical. The established consensus was clear. It was a fake, a curious relic of immigrant nostalgia, not of medieval travel. Yet, a persistent group of researchers, including later generations of linguists and geologists, began to find evidence that did not fit the hoax narrative. They argued that some of the runic forms and linguistic quirks, once thought to be errors, were actually consistent with obscure dialects and transitional writing styles from precisely the late 14th century, knowledge unlikely to be possessed by a rural Minnesota farmer. Even more compelling was the physical evidence of the stone itself. Examinations showed that the weathering within the carved runes, the degree of mineral breakdown and lichen growth, appeared consistent with centuries of exposure, not a few decades. The tree that had grown over it was estimated to be at least 40 years old, meaning the stone had to have been placed there long before Oman owned the land. This creates an enduring standoff. The Kensington Runestone embodies the fundamental tension between institutional history and the disruptive power of a single, inconvenient object. It represents the conflict between a top-down narrative built on decades of academic consensus and a bottom-up discovery that emerges from the very soil it seeks to explain. The stone forces a difficult question: who gets to write history? Is it only the scholars who interpret the established record, or can a piece of stone found by an ordinary farmer have a voice powerful enough to rewrite chapters? This artifact reminds us that history is not a static monologue delivered from the past, but an ongoing conversation, and sometimes the most challenging statements come from the most unexpected messengers. As this debate over pre-Columbian presence echoes, our search turns to the opposite side of the continent, where another culture may have left its own enigmatic calling card in the ancient American Southwest. That tension between what we know and what we find buried in the earth becomes a quiet, physical presence in the Valley of Mexico. In 1933, archaeologist Jose Garcia Payon was excavating a burial site at the Toltec ruins of Calixtlahuaca. His work was meticulous, carefully peeling back the layers of history. Beneath the third intact pre-Hispanic floor, sealed by centuries of undisturbed soil, his team uncovered a small terracotta artifact. It was a sculpted head just a few inches tall, but its features were unmistakable and utterly out of place. This was not a depiction of a Mesoamerican god or a local ruler. The figure wore a distinct, close-fitting cap known as a pileus, a style common among Roman sailors and freed slaves. The beard, the facial structure, the artistic technique of molded terracotta, every detail aligned with Roman artwork from the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. This was the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca Head, and its context made it an archaeological bombshell. The sealed floor layers above it dated the burial to sometime between 1476 and 1510, decades before the Spanish conquest led by Hernán Cortés. According to the timeline written in that soil, this Roman-style artifact had been deliberately placed in a Toltec grave over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome itself, and across an ocean that neither civilization was supposed to have crossed. The implications are staggering. It suggests the faint, ghostly possibility of transatlantic contact, a Roman vessel perhaps blown wildly off course, surviving a journey across the Atlantic to make landfall in the Americas. Could a single shipwreck or a lost trading expedition have introduced this small piece of Mediterranean culture to Mesoamerica, where it was kept as a curious treasure for generations before being laid to rest? Mainstream archaeology has struggled to find a comfortable explanation for the head. The most common critique is that it represents a post-colonial intrusion, a European artifact from the 16th or 17th century that somehow worked its way down into the older layers through an animal burrow, a crack in the floor, or an error in excavation recording. Yet the head was found under 3 separate, intact floors, a context that makes accidental intrusion seem highly unlikely. Others suggest it could be a misidentified artifact from the early Spanish colonial period, perhaps a teaching aid brought by a friar. But the style is specifically classical Roman, not Renaissance, a distinction a trained archaeologist like Garcia Payon would have recognized. The head remains a monumental problem in a very small package. It does not rewrite history by itself, but it punches a tiny, precise hole in the narrative of isolated hemispheric development. It encourages us to reconsider the oceans not as absolute barriers, but as potential highways traversed by the bold, the lucky, or the lost. If a Roman artifact could find its way to a Toltec grave, what other objects, ideas, or even people might have made that impossible journey, leaving only the faintest of traces for us to debate centuries later? This small terracotta head whispers a tantalizing question. Could the ancient world have been far more interconnected than our textbooks have ever dared to suggest? Buried alongside the bones of an ancient giant, a metal wedge refused to fit into any known timeline. Along the banks of the Mureș River in Romania in 1974, construction workers digging a trench made a perplexing find. 35 feet down, encased in a deep layer of sand and gravel, they uncovered 3 objects together. 2 were immediately recognizable, massive fossilized bones from a mastodon, a creature that roamed the earth during the Pleistocene epoch. The third object lying right beside them was something else entirely. It was a wedge-shaped piece of metal, heavily oxidized and clearly worked by human hands. The initial assumption was that it must be a tool from a much later period, perhaps something dropped by a miner or farmer that had sunk into the older layers. But when researchers cleaned and analyzed it, that simple explanation shattered. The object, now known as the Aiud Wedge, was composed of an alloy primarily made of aluminum. This fact alone creates a profound chronological rift. Aluminum is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, but it is never found in its pure form in nature. Isolating it requires a complex industrial process of electrolysis, a technology humanity did not master until the year 1825. Yet, the geological layer where this wedge was found, alongside those mastodon remains, was reliably dated to around 11,000 years ago. The wedge itself bore signs of immense age, coated in a thick, millimeter-deep layer of aluminum oxide, a patina that experts argued would take many centuries to form naturally. Further laboratory analysis deepened the mystery. The metal was not pure aluminum, but a sophisticated alloy incorporating 11 other elements, including copper, zinc, silicon, and lead. This specific composition suggested a deliberate engineering choice, an alloy designed for strength and durability, not a random chunk of ore. The shape, with its symmetrical facets and a clearly drilled hole, indicated it was a manufactured component, possibly part of a larger, more complex assembly. The mainstream counter-argument is practical. Skeptics propose the wedge is simply a broken tooth from a modern excavator bucket, made of hardened aluminum alloy, which fell off during earlier digging and became buried in the sediments. They point out that construction sites are chaotic, and objects can sink into soft, wet ground relatively quickly, giving a false impression of great age. This is a logically sound and likely explanation for many anomalous finds. However, those who studied the artifact point to its context. It was not found in loose, disturbed topsoil. It was recovered from a consolidated layer of sand and gravel 35 feet deep, a stratum containing Pleistocene fossils, sealed for millennia. The thick oxide layer also suggests a long period of burial in a wet, anoxic environment, not a few decades. If it is a modern excavator tooth, its presence in that specific geological context is itself a fascinating puzzle of site formation. The Aiud Wedge, therefore, presents 2 equally challenging possibilities. If it is ancient, it is a physical testament to a forgotten industrial capability, a society that mastered advanced metallurgy at the end of the last ice age, only to have that knowledge completely erased from the archaeological record. If it is modern, its discovery story forces us to re-examine how easily artifacts can become misplaced in time, challenging the certainty of our own archaeological methods. Either way, it compels us to look more closely at the narrative of human technological ascent. We assume progress is a straight line from stone to bronze to iron to steel. But what if that line is not straight at all? What if it is a spiral or a series of peaks and valleys, with entire epochs of innovation lost beneath the sand? This notion of a lost industrial age does not stand alone. It finds echoes in other objects that seem to carry the fingerprints of a high-tech past. The Aiud Wedge suggests a forgotten industrial age, but it is not alone in hinting at metalwork from a deep and improbable past. In 1885, at a coal mine in Wolfsegg, Austria, workers splitting open a freshly excavated block of tertiary period coal made a startling discovery. Embedded within the ancient carbon was a small, heavy object, a nearly perfect cube of iron. This was the Wolfsegg Iron, sometimes called the Salzburg Cube. Its context was the first shock. The coal seam from which it came was reliably dated to the tertiary period, an epoch spanning from about 66 to 2.6 million years ago, a time when the most advanced creatures on Earth were early primates. According to every established model, no human nor any hominid capable of sophisticated metallurgy should have existed. The object itself deepened the mystery. It was not a lump of raw ore. It weighed about 1.7 kilograms and measured roughly a 2-inch cube, though with slightly rounded edges and a deep groove circling its midsection. Its shape was too uniform, its edges too sharp to be a simple geode or a random concretion. The material was even more telling. Initial analysis by the Linz Museum in Austria concluded it was a form of steel, a manufactured alloy of iron and carbon. Here was an artifact that seemed to belong on a 19th century factory floor, yet it had been pulled from a tomb of vegetation that had turned to coal millions of years before the dawn of humanity. The scientific community, understandably skeptical, sought a natural explanation. The leading theory proposed it was a rare type of iron meteorite, a siderite that had fallen to Earth in the distant past and become encased in forming coal. Later studies in the 1960s and 70s seemed to support this, noting a high nickel content and a structure that could be consistent with a meteoritic origin. Yet, even this explanation leaves puzzling gaps. The cube's remarkably regular shape and that distinct encircling groove do not typically form in natural meteorites, which are usually irregular blobs or pitted masses from atmospheric entry. The groove in particular looks manufactured, as if made to hold a rope or a strap. If it is a meteorite, it is one of the most geometrically peculiar ever found. This places the Wolfsegg cube in a frustrating limbo. It is either a profoundly anomalous natural object, or it is a human-made artifact in an impossible geological context. There is no comfortable middle ground. For those who entertain the latter possibility, the implications are vertiginous. It suggests a scenario where a form of intelligence with the capability to smelt and work iron existed in a period we consider pre-human. This does not necessarily mean an industrial civilization like our own. It could point to a much older, entirely different cycle of technological development, a culture that rose and fell so long ago that all other traces, their cities and tools, have been utterly obliterated by geological forces, compressed into dust or subducted beneath the continents. All that remains is this single, stubborn cube, a lone survivor that tumbled into a swamp, was buried under eons of peat, and was finally delivered by a miner's pick into the modern world. It sits at the precise intersection of geology, archaeology, and metallurgy, a cold, hard data point that refuses to fit any standard model. Artifacts like this do more than just puzzle us. They force a fundamental re-evaluation. They ask us to consider the conditions under which intelligence and technology can emerge. Our current timeline is a story we have constructed from the fragments we have found. But what if we have been reading only the last few pages of a much longer and far more mysterious book? The Wolfsegg Iron is a character from a chapter we never knew existed, and its silent presence on a museum shelf challenges us to wonder how many other chapters are still missing, waiting to be discovered not in the future but buried deep in the past. The idea of a lost industrial age gives way to an even more intimate mystery, the discovery of a tiny human figure from an impossible depth. In 1889, workers in Nampa, Idaho, were drilling an artesian well, pushing their pipe down through layers of ancient earth. When they brought up a sample from around 300 feet below the surface, they found more than just clay and gravel. In the sludge was a small, fired clay figurine, just over 1.5 inches tall. It was unmistakably a human form, with a clearly defined head, shoulders, arms, and legs, molded with a care and symmetry that spoke of deliberate artistry. This was the Nampa Figurine, and its context made it an artifact out of time in the most literal sense. The layer from which it was extracted was a stratum of blue clay, situated beneath a 15-foot-thick layer of lava rock and other ancient deposits. Geologists who examined the site, including the respected George Frederick Wright of Oberlin College, attested that the layers were undisturbed. The drilling pipe had punched through them cleanly, meaning the figurine could not have fallen from above. It came from a geological horizon dated to the transition between the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs, an age of approximately 2 million years. This date places the little clay doll in a world of mastodons and saber-toothed cats, a full 1.5 million years before modern humans are believed to have evolved in Africa, and millions of years before any human foot is thought to have touched the Americas. The figurine itself is a study in quiet contradiction. Its craftsmanship is simple yet assured. The clay is uniformly fired, and the figure exhibits a balanced, artistic sensibility, not the crude pinch of a child but the work of someone with an eye for form. If it is authentic, it does not just suggest human presence, it suggests a presence with leisure, ritual, or artistic expression, a culture capable of more than mere survival. The mainstream scientific view holds that it must be a modern intrusion. Skeptics propose the most likely scenario is that the figurine, perhaps a toy belonging to a worker's child or a curio from a local indigenous community, fell into the borehole from the surface during the drilling operation and was carried back up with a later sample. They argue that the chaotic process of well drilling with its circulating water and debris makes stratigraphic certainty difficult, yet the sworn testimonies of the drillers and the initial geologists present a compelling counter-argument. They maintain the blue clay layer was solid and impermeable, and the figurine was brought up encased within it, not as a loose object in the water. This creates a classic standoff between material evidence and established theory. The Nampa figurine does not come with grand claims of lost civilizations or advanced technology. It is a humble object, a tiny sentinel from the deep past. Its power lies in its simplicity and its profound question: who molded this figure and when? If the geological dating is correct, it rewrites the entire narrative of human migration and cultural dawn in the New World, pushing it back into the fog of deep time. It suggests that the story of humanity in the Americas may be far older and far more complex than the Clovis first model can contain. This small clay form reminds us that sometimes the most disruptive challenges to history are not giant machines or complex maps, but the quiet, artistic fingerprints of those who came before, waiting in the dark to be found. The small clay figure from Idaho whispers of a deep human past, but other artifacts seem to shout their defiance from within the very bedrock of time. In 1844, the eminent Scottish scientist Sir David Brewster brought a most perplexing object to the attention of the Royal Society. It came from the Kingoodie quarry, where workers dressing a solid block of Devonian sandstone had uncovered something impossible. Embedded firmly within the ancient stone was an iron nail. The workers had struck it with their tools, its head partly corroded but its shaft clearly visible, imprisoned in rock that had formed over 400 million years ago. This was not a loose stone with a nail stuck in a crack. The stone block was being carefully squared and smoothed for building, and the nail was discovered inside it, fully encapsulated by the solid sandstone matrix. The sheer age of the context is difficult to grasp. The Devonian period is known as the Age of Fishes, a time when vast shallow seas covered continents, and the first forests were just beginning to rise on land. Complex animal life was confined to the oceans. According to every model of evolution, the first creatures even remotely resembling humans would not appear for another 390 million years. An iron nail from this epoch is not just anachronistic, it is a chronological impossibility of the highest order. The conventional geological explanation is one of a natural fissure. Skeptics propose that the nail is not truly 400 million years old, but a much more recent object, perhaps from the Roman era or even the 18th century, that was accidentally driven or fell into a narrow crack in the rock. Over time, they argue, mineral-rich water seeped into that crack, depositing layers of sand and cement that slowly hardened, encasing the nail and giving the false appearance that it was part of the original stone. This process, known as concretion, can create remarkably solid and convincing bonds. Yet, for those who examined the Kingoodie nail, the complete encapsulation presented a challenge to this theory. The workers were dressing a fresh block, cutting into unweathered stone. The nail was not in an external crevice but within the block's interior, suggesting the surrounding material had formed around it uniformly. This places it in the same enigmatic category as the London hammer, another tool found sealed in stone that defies simple explanation. Together, they form a small but persistent class of discoveries known as embedded artifacts. These objects do not merely sit on an ancient layer, they are physically part of it, fused into the geological record itself. They point to a past where our tidy separation of human history from deep geological time becomes blurred. The implication, if one accepts the original context, is staggering. It suggests the possibility of a human or human-like industrial presence in eras so remote they predate not just recorded history, but the very evolution of our species. This forces a radical reconsideration of the timeline of intelligence on Earth. Could there have been cycles of civilization, not just in the last 12,000 years, but in the deep past, whose every trace has been erased by the relentless grinding of plate tectonics, erosion, and time, leaving behind only these stubborn, metallic fragments as clues? Or do these artifacts reveal a gap in our understanding of geology itself, showing how quickly minerals can cement around objects under certain rare conditions, creating perfect deceptive prisons in stone? The Kingoodie hammer nail does not provide an answer, but it hammers home a critical question. When the rock record and the human record collide in such a direct physical way, which story do we trust? The silent, patient testimony of the stone, or the narrative we have constructed from all the other evidence we have found? These embedded anomalies remind us that the past is not a solved puzzle, but a landscape still being excavated, where every strike of the quarryman's tool could uncover a mystery that rewrites the world. The silent testimony of stone holds more than just tools. Sometimes it cradles objects of startling beauty. In the summer of 1852, in the Meeting House Hill district of Dorchester, Massachusetts, workmen were using controlled blasts to break up a large outcropping of solid bedrock. After one particularly powerful explosion, as the dust settled and the rock fragments were being cleared, they noticed something glinting among the shattered pieces. It was not another chunk of stone, it was a beautifully crafted, bell-shaped vase. This was the Dorchester Pot, and its reported context would place it in a timeline that defies all rational understanding of our planet's history. The vase itself was a masterpiece of lost craftsmanship, made of a zinc and silver alloy. It stood about 4.5 inches high and was 6.5 inches at its widest base. Its surface was not plain but decorated with exquisite inlaid floral designs, a delicate 6-petaled flower motif worked into the metal with a skill that spoke of a refined artistic tradition. This was no crude vessel, it was an object of elegance and purpose. The true shock, however, came from where it was found. The workmen reported recovering it from within a solid block of Precambrian Roxbury conglomerate, a dense pudding stone formation. This specific bedrock is not just old, it is ancient beyond human comprehension, reliably dated by geologists to well over 600 million years. To grasp that scale, this vase was supposedly sealed in rock from an era known as the Neoproterozoic, a time when Earth's atmosphere was still developing. The continents were barren wastelands, and the most complex life forms in the oceans were simple, multicellular organisms. Land plants, dinosaurs, mammals, all of it lay hundreds of millions of years in the future. The discovery was considered so significant that it was reported in the scientific journal of the day, Scientific American, in June of 1852. The article described the artifact and its perplexing context in detail, treating it as a genuine mystery. Then, as so often happens with these objects, the vase itself vanished from the historical record, leaving only the published account and the profound questions it raised. If the workman's report was accurate, the implications are so extreme they border on the philosophical. This single artifact, with its intricate metalwork and floral symbolism, does not just suggest a lost human civilization. It catapults the idea into the deep geological past, to an epoch before the very concept of a flower existed. This forces explanations that stretch the boundaries of conventional thought. One possibility is the existence of a prior, advanced terrestrial civilization, so ancient that every trace of its cities and infrastructure has been utterly erased by the relentless churn of plate tectonics and erosion, leaving only this one miraculously preserved relic. Another, even more speculative idea involves the concept of temporal anomalies or time slips, where objects somehow fall through cracks in the fabric of time itself. For some, it even opens the door to the notion of visitation, an artifact left behind by explorers from another world or another time. Mainstream science, of course, offers a more grounded interpretation. The most likely scenario is that the workman's story was mistaken or embellished. The vase could have been a much more recent object, perhaps a 19th century piece of decorative metalwork that was simply lying on the ground or buried in loose soil above the bedrock. The force of the blast could have thrown it into the pile of broken rock, creating the illusion it came from within the solid stone. Without the artifact to examine, and with only a second-hand account from over a century and a half ago, definitive analysis is impossible. Yet the Dorchester Pot endures as the ultimate symbol of temporal dislocation. It represents the farthest boundary of the out-of-place artifact phenomenon, a point where the anomaly is so severe it challenges not just history, but our entire understanding of biological and geological time. It asks us where we draw the line between an intriguing historical puzzle and a paradigm-shattering impossibility. This artifact, lost to us now, serves as a permanent reminder that some discoveries point to a past so strange and so deeply buried that our current frameworks may simply be inadequate to contain them. That small, elegant vase from the deep past represents one extreme of the mystery, but not every enigmatic artifact needs to be millions of years old to captivate us. Sometimes the most compelling puzzles are those that feel almost familiar, yet remain just out of reach. In the late autumn of 1872, a group of workers was digging a hole for a fence post on the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. Their shovels struck something hard, and as they cleared the clay, they unearthed a dark, egg-shaped stone, roughly 4 inches tall and 2.5 inches thick. This was no ordinary rock. Its surface was covered in a series of intricate, precise carvings, a silent language etched in stone that no one living could read. The Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone, as it came to be known, is a masterpiece of miniature symbolism. On one side, a solemn, stoic face is carved in relief. Surrounding it are a series of other images: a teepee, a perfectly rendered ear of corn, a spiraling circle, and a shape resembling a star or a sunburst. On the opposite side, more patterns emerge, including what looks like an inverted arrow and a series of dots and lines. The stone itself is made of a very hard, fine-grained material, later identified as either quartzite or melanite, stones not native to the immediate area. But the detail that truly baffles experts are the two holes drilled through the stone from pole to pole. These are not crude, conical punctures. They are perfectly cylindrical, straight, and smooth, bored with a symmetry and precision that suggests the use of a drill bit and a steady, powered mechanism. This level of drilling technology was not thought to be available to the indigenous cultures of the region in any pre-colonial era. So what are we looking at? The prevailing and most reasonable theory is that it is a Native American artifact of profound ceremonial significance. The symbols could represent a cosmology, a map of the spirit world, or a record of a significant event. The face may depict a chief, a shaman, or a deity. The teepee and corn clearly point to an agricultural, village-based society. Yet this explanation, while logical, only deepens the mystery. The specific combination of symbols is unique. No other artifact from any known northeastern tribe matches this precise iconography. The craftsmanship, especially those drilled holes, is exceptional. If it is a ritual object, what was its function? Was it a talisman, a calendar stone, a teaching tool, or a diplomatic object passed between tribes? The stone's hard composition suggests it was meant to last, to carry its message across generations. But that message is now mute. Mainstream archaeology classifies it as a beautiful anomaly, likely from the 18th or possibly 17th century, but admits its exact origins and purpose are lost. It has resisted every attempt at definitive classification. This is the stone's quiet power. It does not scream of ancient astronauts or lost super civilizations. Instead, it whispers of a rich, complex cultural history that we have only partially recovered. It reminds us that the past is filled with unique individuals, artists, and thinkers whose specific stories are gone, leaving behind only their work as a testament to their presence. The Mystery Stone challenges history not by breaking timelines, but by highlighting the vast, silent gaps within them. It represents the countless everyday mysteries, the personal relics and community treasures whose meanings evaporated when the last person who understood them passed from memory. In this way, it is perhaps more haunting than any impossibly ancient artifact. It is a message we can almost understand, from a world that feels nearly within our grasp, yet remains forever separated from us by the unbridgeable distance of forgotten time. A message carved in stone may be mute, but a shape formed from it can speak volumes about ambition. Scattered across the Diquis Delta of Costa Rica, nestled in jungle clearings and along ancient riverbanks, lie hundreds of stone spheres of such precision they seem to defy their own creation. These are not roughly rounded boulders. They are monumental sculptures, some as tall as a person and weighing over 16 tons, carved with a near-perfect sphericity that would challenge modern artisans even with precision tools. Crafted by the pre-Columbian peoples of the region, most likely between the years 300 and 1500, these spheres were fashioned from some of the hardest stones available, like gabbro, or from slightly softer limestone and sandstone. The true wonder lies not in their age but in their execution. How did a culture without metal tools, without the wheel, and without written mathematical texts achieve such geometric perfection on such a colossal scale? The process itself was a feat of immense patience and skill. Archaeologists believe the sculptors first identified suitable boulders in riverbeds, then used a technique of controlled heating and rapid cooling to fracture away large flakes of stone, gradually working the mass closer to a round form. The final shaping and polishing, achieved through relentless grinding with other stones and sand, would have taken generations of dedicated work for the largest spheres. This was not a casual art form, it was a monumental communal undertaking, but to what end? The purpose of the spheres remains one of archaeology's most elegant puzzles. Some researchers propose they served as astronomical markers, their alignments pointing to celestial events or significant solar positions, turning the landscape into a vast observatory. Others see them as symbols of power and status, erected by chieftains to mark territory or demonstrate the strength and cohesion of their community. A few intriguing theories suggest they were visual representations of celestial bodies, creating a model of the cosmos here on Earth. Whatever their intended function, their existence forces a recalibration of what we assume about ancient technological limits. These spheres are not out of place in time, they are perfectly situated within their cultural context. Yet they are out of place in terms of our modern expectations. They represent a level of abstract thought, communal organization, and stone-working ambition that we simply did not attribute to the societies of that region and era. They challenge the narrative that technological progress is a linear path toward greater complexity. Here was a culture that invested staggering resources not in building taller pyramids or longer walls, but in the pursuit of a perfect form, a mathematical ideal made manifest in stone. The spheres demonstrate that out-of-place artifacts do not always point to forgotten visitors or lost super sciences. Sometimes they point to the profound and often overlooked capabilities of the human spirit right where we expect to find it. They remind us that ancient peoples could achieve localized engineering and artistic marvels that stand, quite literally, as timeless monuments to a different kind of sophistication, one rooted in patience, unity, and a deep, perhaps sacred, understanding of geometry and their place within the natural world. A perfect sphere of stone speaks a silent language of geometry, but what happens when we find a book filled with writing that no one on Earth can read? In the hushed archives of Yale University's Voynich Library rests perhaps the world's most famous literary ghost. The Voynich Manuscript is a small, unassuming codex of about 240 vellum pages, carbon dated to the early 15th century. Yet within its worn covers lies a universe of baffling mystery. Every single page is covered from edge to edge in a flowing, elegant script composed of characters utterly unknown to linguistics. This is not a cipher of a known language, but what appears to be a full, functional language system with its own unique alphabet, grammar, and structure, one that has resisted decipherment for over a century of intense effort. The text is accompanied by illustrations that deepen the enigma. There are pages upon pages of fantastical plants, botanical specimens that bear no resemblance to any flora on our planet, with roots, leaves, and blooms arranged in impossible configurations. Other sections show intricate astronomical or astrological diagrams featuring unfamiliar constellations and celestial mechanisms. Perhaps most puzzling are the so-called biological sections, which depict numerous nude female figures immersed in or connected by elaborate networks of tubes and vessels, reminiscent of anatomical or perhaps even plumbing systems, a visual concept that feels centuries ahead of its time. This book is an island of the inexplicable. It first entered the historical record in the court of Rudolf II of Bohemia in the late 16th century, and its trail leads back to an unknown author in an unknown place for an unknown purpose. The very existence of such a complex, painstakingly created work, filled with consistent but meaningless text, presents a paradox that has consumed some of the brightest minds in cryptography. Teams from both world wars, including top Allied codebreakers fresh from cracking the Enigma machine, turned their skills to the Voynich. They applied every tool of frequency analysis, pattern recognition, and linguistic deconstruction. The result was always the same: frustrating, definitive failure. The text possesses statistical properties of a real language, yet it yields no semantic meaning. This has led to two equally compelling and equally unsettling schools of thought. The first is that the manuscript is a monumental, deliberate hoax, created perhaps to defraud a wealthy patron like Rudolf, who was known for his interest in the occult and rare curiosities. If so, the hoaxer was a genius of unparalleled patience and linguistic invention, crafting not just nonsense, but systematic nonsense that perfectly mimics the patterns of natural language, a feat some experts argue would have been beyond the capability, or even the conceptual framework, of a medieval forger. The second, more tantalizing possibility is that the book is genuine, that it records a unique, localized body of knowledge, a blend of herbalism, astronomy, and perhaps a proto-scientific understanding of human physiology, from a tradition so isolated that its language and its reference points were completely lost to history. In this view, the unidentifiable plants might be stylized representations or species that have since gone extinct. The strange diagrams could map a cosmological system foreign to Western thought. The manuscript then becomes a lone survivor, a single volume from the library of a forgotten culture or a secretive scholarly guild, its context obliterated by time, leaving only this beautiful, impenetrable artifact. The Voynich Manuscript challenges our timeline not with metal or stone, but with information itself. It represents the haunting possibility of a parallel stream of knowledge, one that developed its own way of seeing and describing the world, only to vanish without a trace, save for this one cryptic tome. It is the ultimate historical puzzle because it confronts us with the limits of our own understanding. We can hold it in our hands, we can scan its every page, and yet its message, its very reason for being, remains locked away, a silent testament to the vast and echoing spaces in the story of human thought. A book of unreadable text is one form of locked knowledge, but a stone disc covered in perfectly legible, impossible images is another. Deep in a private collection rests an artifact known as the genetic disc, a circle of dark lyddite stone roughly the size of a large dinner plate. Its surface is not inscribed with cryptic symbols, but with clear, undeniable carvings that depict the very miracle of life's beginning. In precise, raised relief, the disc shows human sperm cells with their distinctive heads and whipping tails approaching a large ovum. Another sequence illustrates the stages of a developing fetus curled within the womb. Further along, intricate patterns seem to detail the process of cell division, the splitting of a single cell into the many that build a body. These are not artistic abstractions or mythological scenes. They are textbook illustrations of human embryology and genetics, a visual language of biology that science did not formally decode until the 19th and 20th centuries. According to its controversial provenance, this disc was discovered in Colombia, a region with a rich pre-Columbian history, yet its imagery belongs to a modern laboratory. The immediate and overwhelming reaction from mainstream science is one of deep skepticism. Experts in archaeology and the history of medicine universally label it a clever modern forgery. They argue that the carvings are simply too perfect, too aligned with contemporary biological understanding, to be anything but a hoax created for sale or sensation. The disc's material, lyddite, is a hard, dense stone, but its age cannot be definitively proven without knowing its exact archaeological context, which is undocumented. The precision of the carvings, critics note, could easily be achieved with modern rotary tools. In their view, the genetic disc is a fascinating fraud, a piece of pseudo-archaeology designed to amaze and confuse. Yet, for those who defend its potential authenticity, The questions it raises are too profound to dismiss outright. Proponents point to the wear on the stone and the patina within the carved grooves, which they argue suggests significant age, not a recent creation. More compelling than the physical details, however, is the conceptual leap the disc represents. If it is genuine, it does not merely suggest that an ancient culture understood that life came from union. It demonstrates a granular, microscopic comprehension of the process. They knew about sperm. They understood fertilization as a cellular event. They mapped fetal development in stages. This implies a scientific methodology that included observation at a scale far beyond the naked eye, hinting at the use of lenses or other optical technology lost to time. Such knowledge would place this unnamed civilization not just alongside the great astronomers and engineers of antiquity, but ahead of them, pioneering a field of science that would lie dormant for thousands of years. The disc pushes the boundary of ancient possibility from physics and engineering directly into the intimate realm of biology. It asks us to consider a history where the greatest mystery, the origin of a human life, was not a subject for myth alone, but for meticulous empirical study. Whether a modern fake or a relic of a forgotten biology, the genetic disc serves a powerful purpose. It holds up a mirror to our own assumptions about the timeline of discovery. We accept that ancient cultures could map stars and calculate planetary motions, feats of macro-scale observation. But we balk at the idea they could have turned their inquiry inward toward the microcosm within. This artifact, real or not, challenges that bias. It suggests that the hunger to understand our own creation is as old as humanity itself, and that the paths to that understanding may have been far more diverse and far more advanced than our current historical record can show. The mystery of representation becomes a shimmering question in gold, cast by master artisans over 1,000 years ago. The Quimbaya civilization, flourishing in what is now Colombia between the years 300 and 1550, left behind a stunning legacy of metallurgy, crafting intricate objects from an alloy called tumbaga, a mix of gold and copper. Most of these artifacts are beautiful, stylized depictions of the natural world that surrounded them: frogs, lizards, insects, and birds, each one a testament to their reverence for life. But a small, peculiar group of these objects refuses to be so easily categorized. Known informally as the Quimbaya Jets, these artifacts are unlike any typical zoomorphic figure. They possess a sleek, streamlined body, what looks like a distinct cockpit canopy or fuselage, and most strikingly, triangular delta wings that sweep back from the body, often with a separate, smaller set of horizontal stabilizers at the rear. To the modern eye, the silhouette is unmistakable. It looks exactly like a jet aircraft or a space shuttle. Mainstream archaeology offers a clear and rational interpretation. Scholars identify these objects as highly stylized representations of local fauna. They could be depictions of birds like the king vulture, with its broad, flat wings in flight, or of certain seed pods that have a winged, aerodynamic shape as they spin through the air. Some resemble stingrays or even certain insects. The Quimbaya artists were not aiming for photographic realism. They were abstracting the essence of flight, capturing the dynamic form of a creature moving through the air, not its anatomical details. This is a common practice in art across cultures, reducing a complex subject to its most symbolic and elegant lines. Yet, when you hold one of these objects, the comparison feels almost overwhelming. The precision of the design is not random, it follows consistent principles. The wings are always set at a specific angle to the body, the weight is distributed in a balanced way, and the overall form is symmetrical and streamlined. This led a group of German aerodynamics enthusiasts in the 1990s to conduct a fascinating experiment. They created precise, scaled-up models of several Quimbaya artifacts, weighted them correctly according to the proportions of the originals, and attached small motors. When launched, these models did not tumble or stall. They flew. They demonstrated stable, smooth gliding capabilities, and with powered propulsion, some even performed like basic aircraft. This experiment does not prove the Quimbaya had jets, but it does prove something profound. The forms they created are not just artistic, they are inherently aerodynamic. They accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, designed shapes that obey the laws of physics necessary for flight. This creates a fascinating rift in interpretation. Are we looking at advanced stylization, where artists intuitively honed a form toward an ideal of speed and grace that happens to align with engineering principles they could never have articulated? Or does this point to a more literal inspiration? Could the Quimbaya have witnessed something in their sky that they sought to replicate in a precious, durable metal, a phenomenon so extraordinary it became a recurring motif in their sacred art? The artifacts themselves do not provide a definitive answer. They sit silently in museum cases, reflecting light and confounding categories. They challenge us to examine our own biases. When we see a triangular shape, our modern minds instantly jump to aircraft because that is the dominant symbol of flight in our world. We project our own technological framework onto the past. The Quimbaya artists may have been projecting their own framework, one where the essence of a stingray, a bird, and the concept of celestial travel all blended into a single, powerful symbolic form. These golden objects ultimately ask us where symbolism ends and observation begins. They force us to consider that ancient art might not always be about what we think it is about. It might be a record of wonder, a rendering of something truly seen, or it might be the pure expression of a form that feels right, a shape that captures the very spirit of movement through the air, whether that air is traveled by feathers, by seeds, or by something beyond our current understanding. The golden forms of the Quimbaya artifacts challenge our perception of ancient symbolism, but a far more literal and contentious debate is carved in stone on the walls of an Egyptian temple. Deep within the crypts of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, a series of reliefs presents an image that seems to leap from the pages of a modern electrical manual. Dating to the late Ptolemaic period, around 100 years before the Common Era, these intricate carvings show figures standing beside large, elongated objects that bear a startling resemblance to glass bulbs. Inside each bulb, a snake stretches in a sinuous line, its head touching the inner tip of the vessel. This serpentine form is connected by what looks like a thick, braided cable to a small box, which is held by a kneeling, baboon-like figure. Another person stands nearby, as if supporting or guarding the entire assembly. To a contemporary eye, the scene is almost self-explanatory, a depiction of ancient electricians at work, with a bulb, a filament, a power cable, and a generator or battery. This interpretation, famously championed by authors like Erich von Däniken, suggests the Dendera reliefs are proof of electrical lighting in ancient Egypt, a technology that would not be formally reinvented until the time of Thomas Edison. The visual parallel is so compelling it has fueled decades of speculation about lost scientific knowledge. The mainstream Egyptological explanation, however, is rooted not in physics but in profound mythology. Scholars identify the bulb-shaped object as a lotus flower, a sacred symbol of creation and rebirth. The snake inside is the deity Harsomptus, a manifestation of the sun god, often depicted as a serpent emerging from the lotus to bring light into the world. The cable is interpreted as the stem of the plant, and the box as a jed pillar, a symbol of stability. The baboon figure is likely the god Hapi, associated with the Nile's inundation. In this reading, the entire tableau is a sophisticated cosmological diagram, illustrating the moment of divine creation using the symbolic language well understood by temple priests and initiates. This mythological framework is robust and consistent with thousands of other Egyptian artistic conventions. Yet, the debate persists precisely because of that uncanny visual echo. Why choose a form so perfectly bulb-like? Why depict the serpent in such a rigid, filament-like posture within a contained vessel, rather than coiled freely? For those who see a technological clue, these choices feel too specific to be purely artistic license. They argue that ancient artisans, tasked with depicting a miraculous, glowing object they did not fully understand, might have rendered it as faithfully as their symbolic vocabulary allowed, creating a hybrid image that blends observed technology with religious allegory. It is a tantalizing thought that the temple's dark, windowless inner chambers, covered in soot-free ceilings, might have been illuminated by something other than flickering, smoky torches. The truth likely resides in the rich middle ground between these extremes. The Dendera reliefs are a powerful example of how ancient minds conceptualized and depicted the phenomenon of light itself. They were not illustrating a vacuum tube with a tungsten filament, but they were absolutely representing the principle of contained, controlled, and divinely generated illumination. Their genius was in creating a visual metaphor so potent that it transcends its original cultural context, speaking directly to our own technological age. The lamps of Dendera, whether symbolic or literal, ultimately cast light on a deeper human constant, the relentless drive to harness and understand the very energy that banishes darkness, whether through prayer, myth, or the mysterious spark of invention. The quest for advanced ancient metalwork often leads us to look down into mines and forges, but sometimes the answer might have fallen from the sky. On the island of Sri Lanka, a persistent legend speaks of a cataclysm from the heavens around 1400 years before the Common Era. Historical chronicles and some geological surveys point to a massive meteorite impact in the region, an event that did more than reshape the landscape. It is said to have delivered a gift, a vast deposit of pure, workable metal. This was not ordinary terrestrial iron ore. Meteoritic iron is a natural alloy, rich in nickel, and comes pre-smelted by its fiery passage through the atmosphere. To a metalworking culture, finding this material would be like discovering a ready-made treasury of the strongest substance they had ever known, a metal from the stars itself. Local traditions and some controversial archaeological finds suggest the civilization that thrived there, possibly early ancestors of the Sinhalese kingdoms, did not let this cosmic resource go to waste. They are credited with crafting tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects from this sky metal at a time when much of the world was still firmly in the Bronze Age. If accurate, this provides a fascinating and elegant explanation for a class of out-of-place artifacts, sophisticated iron objects that appear in a region before the established timeline for widespread iron smelting technology. It would not be a case of lost human invention, but of celestial providence, a natural shortcut provided by the universe itself. The implications are profound. A single catastrophic event could have jump-started a local technological revolution. Imagine a society skilled in working bronze suddenly presented with mountains of a superior material. They would have had to develop new techniques to heat, shape, and work this tougher metal, accelerating their metallurgical knowledge by centuries in a single generation. The weapons forged from this iron-nickel alloy would have been harder, sharper, and more durable than any bronze blade, potentially altering the balance of power in the region. This scenario offers a compelling bridge between anomalous artifacts and understandable natural phenomena. It suggests that sometimes the out-of-place element in our historical timelines isn't proof of a forgotten super science, but evidence of a cosmic lottery win, where a civilization was given a head start by the very heavens. This idea reframes how we view technological progress. It is not always a slow, steady climb born solely of human ingenuity. Occasionally, It can be a sudden leap triggered by external, almost miraculous events. The Sri Lanka meteorite hypothesis, while still debated and requiring more concrete archaeological validation, serves as a crucial reminder. When we find advanced metalwork in an unexpected time or place, we must look not only to human history but to the geological and even astronomical record. The secrets of the past are not just buried in the earth, they are sometimes written in the stars, waiting to fall into human hands and change the course of history in a flash of light and thunder. The silent stones of Mohenjo-Daro hold a different kind of mystery, one written not in symbols but in fire. This meticulously planned city of the ancient Indus Valley, flourishing over 4,000 years ago, is celebrated for its advanced sanitation, orderly streets, and apparent social harmony. Yet, scattered amidst this evidence of peaceful urban life are signs of a sudden and terrifying end. In certain districts, archaeologists found something deeply unsettling. The very bricks of the buildings and fragments of pottery showed signs of having been exposed to such intense, searing heat that they had fused together, their surfaces transformed into a glassy slag. This process, known as vitrification, typically requires temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, far hotter than any ordinary house fire or even a kiln could produce. Nearby, the skeletal remains of individuals were discovered not in formal resting places, but lying in streets and homes, as if caught in a single, catastrophic moment. Mainstream archaeology has long sought explanations within the realm of known natural and human events. The leading theories suggest a combination of factors, perhaps a devastating flood from the nearby Indus River, followed by an invasion by nomadic groups. The scattered remains could be explained by conflict or a rapid abandonment. The vitrified material, some experts argue, could be the result of a massive, city-wide conflagration that burned with unusual ferocity due to concentrated fuel sources like stored oils or grains. These are logical, evidence-based interpretations that fit within our standard understanding of ancient societal collapse. However, the extreme and localized nature of the vitrification has prompted a more speculative line of inquiry. Some researchers point to ancient Indian epics like the Mahabharata, which contain passages describing weapons of unimaginable power. These texts speak of projectiles charged with the energy of the universe, explosions brighter than 1,000 suns, and blasts that could level cities and leave the land poisoned for generations. While these are traditionally understood as poetic mythology, the physical state of Mohenjo-Daro's ruins leads some to wonder if they could be distant, distorted memories of a real and terrible technology. Could the city have been destroyed by an ancient high-energy weapon, the signature of which is this glassified stone? Geologists offer another possible natural explanation that bridges the gap between mundane fire and mythical weaponry. They suggest the vitrification could be evidence of a cosmic airburst, similar to the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, where a meteoroid or comet fragment exploded in the atmosphere. Such an event would generate a massive thermal pulse and shockwave, capable of instantly incinerating everything on the ground directly below and creating temperatures high enough to melt sand and stone. A plasma discharge from such an impact could indeed leave a signature eerily similar to what is found at the site. The true power of Mohenjo-Daro's mystery lies in the questions it forces us to confront, not about aliens or lost superweapons, but about the nature of evidence itself. It challenges the peaceful narrative we have constructed for the Indus Valley civilization, reminding us that even the most orderly societies are vulnerable to sudden, apocalyptic ends. More importantly, it highlights how we interpret the past. When we find evidence of extreme heat and sudden destruction, our first instinct is to look for a known cause, a fire, a war, a flood. But what happens when the evidence seems to outstrip those explanations? Do we expand our understanding of natural cataclysms, Or do we reconsider the technological capabilities of those who came before us? The fused bricks and scattered bones of Mohenjo-Daro stand as a silent testament to a final moment lost to time, a stark reminder that the line between a natural disaster and a forgotten catastrophe may be thinner and far more enigmatic than we ever supposed. The glassified stone of Mohenjo-Daro forces us to question what ancient eyes might have witnessed, but in the dry stillness of another temple, a different kind of visual puzzle waits on the ceiling. High above the floor of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, a panel of hieroglyphs holds a cluster of shapes that stop modern visitors in their tracks. To anyone living in the 21st century, the carved symbols appear to depict with startling clarity a helicopter complete with a rounded cockpit and a spinning rotor blade. Right beside it, other forms resemble a submarine, a jet plane, and something akin to a futuristic hovercraft or flying saucer. The immediate, visceral reaction is one of disbelief, followed by a thrilling question. Could this be definitive proof that ancient Egyptians possessed, or perhaps foresaw, the technology of our modern world? Egyptology provides a clear and logically sound explanation for this astonishing anomaly, one rooted in the practical realities of temple renovation. The panel is a palimpsest, a surface that has been written over. The original ceiling relief was commissioned by Pharaoh Seti I, celebrating his name and titles with traditional hieroglyphic symbols. Years later, his son and successor, Ramesses II, ordered his own cartouches and titles to be carved over parts of his father's work, a common practice to assert royal legacy. The craftsmen would have plastered over the older carvings and then etched the new symbols into the fresh surface. Over millennia, however, fragments of the older plaster have fallen away. What remains today is not a single, intentional image, but a complex overlap of two separate sets of hieroglyphs, one from Seti and one from Ramesses. The erosion has created a random, accidental fusion of lines and curves. The famous helicopter shape, for instance, is likely a combination of Ramesses's carved title over the top of Seti's earlier symbols for a reed and a forearm, with the plaster loss creating the illusion of a cohesive, mechanical form. This orthodox view is compelling and fits the known historical behavior of Egyptian pharaohs. It demonstrates how natural processes of decay can conspire with human revision to create something entirely new and unintended. Yet the power of the Abydos images lies in their stubborn refusal to be explained away so easily. The shapes are not just vaguely suggestive, they are eerily precise. The helicopter's silhouette is too perfect, the submarine's conning tower too distinct. This is where a fundamental quirk of human perception takes center stage, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. This is our brain's innate tendency to find familiar patterns in random stimuli, to see a face in the clouds, a figure in the shadows, or in this case, modern machinery in ancient stone. Our minds are hardwired for recognition, and when presented with ambiguous shapes, we automatically match them to the most familiar templates in our visual library, which for us is filled with images of aircraft and vehicles. The Abydos helicopter thus becomes a perfect case study in the eternal conflict between archaeological explanation and sensational interpretation. On one side stands a reasoned, evidence-based argument grounded in documented historical practices and material science. On the other side thrives a powerful narrative of mystery, one that suggests lost knowledge or even prophetic vision. This tension is what makes the artifact so endlessly captivating. It speaks directly to our desire for the past to be more mysterious, more connected to our present than the sometimes dry facts allow. The real lesson of Abydos may not be about ancient technology, but about the stories we choose to see. It challenges us to ask ourselves a difficult question. When we look at the past, are we seeing what was actually there, or are we seeing a reflection of our own world, projected onto the canvas of time? This temple ceiling reminds us that history is not just a record of what happened, but also a mirror for our own imaginations, forever showing us what we most wish to find. These scattered objects, from the fused stone of Mohenjo-Daro to the overlapping glyphs at Abydos, form a constellation of questions across the globe. Taken together, they do not point to a single, simple truth, but rather illuminate a vast spectrum of possibility. On one end of that spectrum lie the modern explanations, the hoaxes crafted for profit or fame, the simple misidentifications born of our own pattern-seeking minds, and the natural geological processes that can encase a modern spark plug in what looks like ancient stone. These are the answers that satisfy our standard frameworks, and they resolve the majority of these mysteries with a comfortable, earthly logic. At the opposite end of the spectrum reside the genuine, paradigm-shattering anomalies, the few artifacts that, after every layer of rigorous scrutiny, still refuse to fit. These are the objects that whisper of lost chapters, of technologies and travels we have not yet accounted for, of a human story far more winding and complex than any textbook outline. The vast, fascinating middle ground is where most of these artifacts lie, in a state of unresolved tension, their true nature suspended between these two poles. The scientific method, our most powerful tool for understanding the world, rightly demands a high standard. It requires verifiable evidence, clear archaeological context, and the rigorous challenge of peer review. By these strict measures, many out-of-place artifacts fall short. They emerge from undocumented excavations, their chain of custody is unclear, or they are unique finds with no supporting evidence to corroborate their astounding claims. To the academic establishment, this makes them curiosities at best and distractions at worst. Yet, their stubborn persistence in our museums, our literature, and our collective imagination speaks to something deeper than scientific proof. It reflects a widespread and intuitive skepticism toward histories that feel too neat, too linear, and too complete. There is a public longing for a past that retains its mystery, that allows for the unexpected genius, the impossible voyage, and the forgotten culture whose only legacy is a single, baffling relic. These artifacts give form to that longing. This creates a vital, though often fraught, dialogue. On one side, academia is challenged to remain genuinely open to anomalous data, to avoid dismissing an inconvenient object simply because it does not fit the prevailing model. History, after all, has been rewritten before by a single disruptive discovery. On the other side, enthusiasts and alternative researchers are reminded of the essential discipline of critical thinking. The desire for a more wondrous past must be balanced with a respect for evidence, logic, and the painstaking work of verification. The middle path is neither blind acceptance nor automatic dismissal, but a committed, curious skepticism. Perhaps then, the greatest value of these out-of-place artifacts is not that they prove any specific alternative timeline. Their true gift is what they do to our minds. They are the grit in the oyster of history, the persistent irritant that prevents our understanding from hardening into dogma. They force us to ask better questions, to re-examine assumptions we took for granted, and to hold our current narratives with a lighter, more provisional grasp. They keep the spirit of inquiry vibrantly alive, ensuring that the story of humanity remains an open book, with pages still being discovered and old chapters constantly being reinterpreted. In the end, they teach us that the past is not a locked room, but a living conversation, and every mysterious object, whether a hoax, a mistake, or a genuine message from a lost world, is another voice asking us to listen a little more closely. Our journey reveals a landscape of history far more rugged and uncertain than any smooth textbook timeline. From potential ancient computers and batteries to figurines in million-year-old strata, each artifact, whether ultimately explained as a hoax, a mistake, or a genuine anomaly, serves as a probe into the limits of our knowledge. They are not merely objects but questions made solid, A hammer sealed in stone asks us which we trust more, the rock or our records. A map showing an ice-free continent wonders if we are the first to discover our world or merely the latest. A manuscript of unreadable text challenges the very continuity of human thought. Together, they remind us that history is not a closed book but an ongoing excavation, both literal and intellectual. It is a puzzle where we are still finding the pieces, and some of them seem to belong to a different picture entirely. While mainstream science rightly demands extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims, these enduring mysteries perform a vital service. They ensure we never become complacent in our storytelling. They prevent the past from becoming a fossilized narrative, instead keeping it alive, debated, and wonderfully strange. They are the cracks in the foundation of established history, and it is through those cracks that the most intriguing light often shines. So, where does this leave us? The evidence sits before us, a collection of contradictions. Some items will inevitably be revealed as modern creations or natural formations misunderstood. Others may forever linger in that gray area, too stubborn to be dismissed yet too isolated to rewrite the consensus. A few might one day be the key that unlocks a door we did not even know was there. The true value lies not in proving a single alternative theory, but in nurturing a mindset of humble curiosity. It is the willingness to look at a familiar timeline and ask, but what if? It is the recognition that our ancestors were every bit as intelligent and inventive as we are, capable of achievements that may have left only the faintest of echoes. So, what do you believe? Are these objects glimpses of lost civilizations, evidence of forgotten cycles of technology, or simply fascinating errors in our reading of the deep past? The conversation does not end here. Share your perspective in the comments below. Which artifact challenges your view of history the most? Subscribe for more deep dives into the greatest puzzles left behind by time. And remember, the next chapter of the human story is not just being written for the future, it is still being uncovered piece by mysterious piece from the past. The ground beneath our feet and the history within it is always waiting to surprise us.